The military tab covers basically all of our unit types and our Army and Navy morale. Each thing on the list shows what kind of unit we have and their stats. You can only change the type of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, in other words, land units that you get. Your ships are all automatically upgraded as your naval tech goes up. I'll start with the ships because they're a little easier to understand. There's 4 types: big ships, light ships, galleys, and transports. Transports carry troops. They're the only ones that can. They basically can't attack. They do have attack values. There are 2 of these attack values, fire and shock. I'll talk about these with land units because they barely matter with Navy. And so they're useful, but they need to be defended. Galleys are basically rowing ships. They're terrible anywhere but shallow seas like the Mediterranean, but for the first 200 years of the game, they're really good in the Mediterranean. Since England isn't in the Mediterranean, we don't really want any of these, and we won't really build any of these. Light ships are fast. They tend to have low fire because they don't have as many cannons, but they do have equivalent shock value to big ships, and they're less expensive and take less time to build. Big ships are expensive, but they have the best stats. They usually win fights if you have more of them, and, if you're planning to play a naval power like England, you definitely want a bunch of big ships. They do take about a year each to build, though, so you don't want to lose them. Now, land units are probably the more interesting ones. Each land unit type, there are only 3. Infantry, which are just general troops, cavalry, which are mounted troops, and artillery, which are siege weapons. If you click on this thing, you can choose your type of unit. You start with just Latin medieval infantry as England in 1399, but as you research more technology, more things open up to you. Infantry units have 3 stats. Fire, which is supposed to kind of be guns, but it's kind of just one type of thing. Shock, which is kind of melee. And morale, which is just how long they'll fight before they give up and run away. Each one has a different number of offensive and defensive stats. So, for instance, this infantry here has 3 offensive shock, which means it does a lot of shock damage, but it has no defense, so it's going to take a lot of damage. It also has high morale offense, which means it inflicts a lot of morale damage on people, but it doesn't have very much defense. As of Heir to the Throne, morale is probably the most important stat, so we'd want these guys because they have good defensive and offensive morale, and they don't inflict a lot of casualties, but it's not as important as winning. Cavalry is basically the same. Cavalry tends to have a very high shock value, and it's very good at that, but its morale and fire are pretty terrible. That's fine though, it does a lot of damage, that's what's important. Siege weapons, generally speaking, you just want to go for the stats that are the highest offensive stats, because the way that armies fight, siege engines should not ever be on the line of fire taking damage. So just pick the ones with the highest offensive stats. Generally, they just are there to supply some support damage, and they're also there to help. War exhaustion is basically a function of how pissed off people are with the current state of warfare. If you're not at war, then there's not going to be much, although it will linger after a war. The goal of war exhaustion is to make yours go up slowly while the other person that you're fighting's go up faster. If you do that, they'll get a lot of revolts, they'll be less willing to keep fighting, but you'll still be able to do it. There are various ways to do this. You want to keep your troop losses down, you don't want to lose too many provinces, you don't want to do too many things that would upset the populace back home. Down below this are just your army stats. You have your morale, which is basically a total number based on how much your troops will actually be willing to do before they break and run away. You have your support limits, which are basically the maximum number of troops you can have before your maintenance starts spiraling out of control. You can have more than that, you just will start paying a lot more per unit for it. So for instance, if I have more than 37 troops, then my maintenance is going to be a lot higher for each additional troop, and if I have more than 60 ships, my maintenance will be a lot higher for my navy. When you're at peace, a good way to save money is to take your maintenance slider for your army and slide it down to the bottom. Your armies will still be at their maximum strength, they just will have half their morale. So before you start a fight, you're going to want to slide it back up. That can be disadvantageous if you get ambushed, but it's still not too bad. The religion tab is pretty basic. First of all, it shows your religion at the top. I've slightly modified the religion, so these aren't quite the same modifiers for Catholic as are in the normal game. And there's a little image to the right that usually is tied to your religion. In this case, it seems to be a Christian imagery, but for Islam, it's just like a pattern, things like that. On the left, we have religious decisions, which are related to various aspects of your religion. They're usually unique either within a particular faith group, like there are some that are applied to all Christians, but there are also some that are specific to religions. So, for instance, Catholics can't seize church land, but Protestants can, and Catholics can do a lot of things. Catholicism is definitely the most involved religion in the game. It's the only one with its own special sub-thing with the papacy, things like that. There's tolerance on the right, which basically is a modifier to the revolt risk of a population in a province based on their dominant religion. So you have the true faith, which for your country is whatever you consider to be your faith. So Catholics are tolerated very highly. Then there's heretics, which are members of your same religious group, but who have a different creed. So Protestants, the Orthodox, are all considered to be heretics. They're not tolerated by Catholics. And then there's heathens, which are members of any other religion group. So Muslims, Eastern religions, pagans, whatever. They're not tolerated even worse than heretics are. Although, depending on the ideas you have, you might be more tolerant of heretics or of heathens, depending. And, of course, this changes based on your religion. So, if you were a Shiite, you would tolerate yourself much better. You would tolerate Sunnis a little worse, and you would tolerate Christians and other religions much worse. Defender of the Faith is something that you can claim if you have a lot of prestige and money. It gives you some neat bonuses, but you don't want to lose a war while you have it. It's very expensive, and it applies to your entire religion, and if you have low prestige, other people can grab it from you. If you're the only particular power of your religion, then it's pretty good because it gives you a lot of bonuses and nobody's going to take it. So, like, if you were a Hindu power and influenced all of India and annexed them, you could claim Hinduism, Defender of the Faith, and just kind of reap the bonuses there. Down below this, it's kind of odd that they put it in the religion tab, but they just needed a place to put it as rebel factions. If you have rebels active in your country, then you can see what type they are, what they want, and there's even an option to give in to them, which is almost never a good idea. But, you know, for instance, you might have religious rebels that want you to convert the state's religion, that sort of thing. Generally, you don't want to negotiate with them.